Briatore's voice cut through Italian radio like a jolt of static. Next year, everything will change. At that moment, Lewis Hamilton's faltering Ferrari story suddenly had a new plotline. Not from inside Maranello, not from the Scuderia's own mouthpieces, but from Flavio Briatore, a man whose paddock instincts have rewritten Formula One history more than once. With Hamilton sitting sixth in the championship and branding himself useless only months into his Ferrari career, why would Briatore risk his reputation on a comeback prediction? The answer isn't just about Hamilton. It's about the most radical rule change since 2014, a technical reset designed to dismantle dynasties. And the question is no longer if Hamilton can adapt, but whether Ferrari has the courage to hand him the tools before McLaren buries them both. When Flavio Briatore speaks, the paddock still listens, even if they pretend not to. This is a man who orchestrated Fernando Alonso's back-to-back world championships at Renault, spotted raw potential where others saw only risk, and whose political maneuvering has left scars on Formula One governance that remain visible today. He has lived through multiple regulatory resets, and his voice on La Politica nel Pallone carried the weight of someone who has learned when to place bets. Sooner or later, he'll solve the problems, Briatore said of Hamilton. The casual phrasing masked a sharper truth, that Hamilton's struggles in 2025 are not permanent flaws, but temporary mismatches between driver and machine. And when the regulations swing in 2026, Briatore expects those mismatches to evaporate. Why does this matter? Because Briatore has always been a political barometer. He rarely wastes breath on drivers without future influence. That he is willing to go public, in Italy no less, where Ferrari's performance is scrutinized with religious intensity, suggests insiders are already recalibrating their expectations for Hamilton's Ferrari tenure. Numbers make this prediction sharper. Hamilton's average deficit to Charles Leclerc in qualifying this year has been 0.2 of a second, with tyre degradation costing him nearly 0.25 seconds per lap in race trim compared to McLaren's benchmark. Yet Briatore framed these margins not as signs of decline, but as evidence of how compressed the field has become. 7 cars within 0.2, he emphasised, a championship bottleneck where the smallest regulation swing can flip the order entirely. But here's the political twist. Only 12 months ago, Briatore admitted he didn't understand Ferrari's decision to break up the Leclerc-Sainz pairing. He publicly questioned Hamilton's signing. To pivot so dramatically and so publicly raises one uncomfortable question. What has Briatore heard inside the corridors of power that makes him believe Ferrari's 2026 car will unlock Hamilton's final act? That answer lies not in Briatore's words, but in Hamilton's numbers and the psychology of a champion calling himself useless. Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari story was never supposed to look like this. The announcement of his move to Maranello was framed as destiny fulfilled. The 7-time world champion in red, chasing history with the most storied team in Formula One. Instead, 9 months into his first season, Hamilton's voice over team radio has become a soundtrack of frustration. "I feel useless," he confessed in Australia, after a miscommunication on tyre strategy left him stranded out of position. The word echoed louder than the lap times. On paper, Hamilton's season has not been catastrophic, but it has been relentlessly underwhelming. His lone bright spot, victory in the sprint at Shanghai, came under unusual circumstances, on a weekend when Ferrari stumbled into a sweet spot with tyre preparation. In full-distance Grand Prix, the ceiling has been lower. His best finish remains 4th, a result that would be acceptable for a rookie bedding in, but cuts like an insult for a driver chasing an 8th world title. Numbers underline the reality. Hamilton's average qualifying position through the first 12 rounds has been 6.8 compared to Leclerc's 4.9. In race trim, Hamilton loses nearly 0.22 seconds per lap to his teammate across stints longer than 20 laps. In modern Formula One, where races are often decided by margins of 0.3 per lap, this gap isn't just a weakness. It's a strategic liability. The SF25's design flaws compound the problem. The car's inconsistent rear stability has punished Hamilton's driving style, which relies on precision under braking and rotational control through medium-speed corners. Instead of leaning on instinct, Hamilton has been fighting corrections. The body language tells the story, a driver gripping rather than flowing, and yet the psychology matters as much as the stopwatch. Hamilton's choice of the word useless reveals a man whose standards have not lowered, even when the machinery beneath him has. For Briatore, this is not a sign of decline, but of compressed frustration waiting for release. The key question now is whether Ferrari's 2026 car, born under new regulations, can finally turn that frustration into liberation. Because if history repeats, Hamilton's lowest point could be the prelude to his greatest reset. Formula One's history is defined not just by drivers or teams, but by regulation changes that reset the competitive order. In 2026, the sport will undergo its most radical transformation since the dawn of the turbo hybrid era in 2014. And this is where Flavio Briatore's prediction gains traction. At the heart of the reset is the new power unit formula. Engines will shift toward 50% electric power with sustainable fuels and simplified turbocharging systems. For Ferrari, whose internal combustion unit remains among the most powerful but least efficient, this change could close the gap to McLaren and Mercedes. More importantly, it plays directly into Hamilton's strengths. His mastery has never been about raw top speed. It has been about energy deployment, braking efficiency and tyre preservation, qualities that become decisive in eras of energy-limited racing. Aerodynamically, the 2026 cars will shrink with reduced downforce and drag profiles designed to improve racing. Smaller cars mean less stability, more movement under braking, and a greater emphasis on driver feel. This is the exact arena where Hamilton excels. His ability to balance a car through instability was the foundation of his dominance in the wet at Silverstone, in the chaos of Istanbul, and during Mercedes' early struggles in 2014. The cars may lose 2 seconds per lap in outright pace, but they will demand drivers who can think, adapt, and improvise mid-corner, Hamilton's trademark skill set. Briatore's words, "Next year everything will change," were not just optimism, they were a reflection of how compressed the field will become. In 2025, 7 cars already sit within 2/10 in qualifying. With 2026's reset, that compression becomes volatility. A single innovation, a single setup philosophy could swing titles. And here lies the paradox. Ferrari, a team often accused of political paralysis, must now become the most agile. If they can design a car that suits Hamilton's strengths, the regulation swing offers him a final window to chase an 8th championship. But to understand why this matters so deeply, we must look backward to 2013, when Hamilton was dismissed as a man leaving McLaren for mediocrity. Because history has a way of repeating itself in Formula One. For those who believe Hamilton's struggles in 2025 signal decline, it is worth remembering that we've been here before. In 2013, his first year at Mercedes, Hamilton was a driver adrift. He managed a single victory in Hungary, finished 4th in the championship, and spent much of the season frustrated by a car that seemed allergic to tyre management. Nico Rosberg often looked more at home in the W04. The paddock consensus was brutal. Hamilton had swapped a proven McLaren contender for a midfield gamble. And yet, 1 year later, the narrative flipped. The introduction of turbo hybrid power units in 2014 played directly into Mercedes' preparation, and Hamilton's adaptability became the catalyst for a new era. His smoothness on throttle, his precision under braking, and his ability to exploit energy deployment systems turned Mercedes' technical advantage into dynastic dominance. By the end of 2014, Hamilton was champion again, and the decision that looked reckless 12 months earlier suddenly seemed prophetic. This is the parallel Briatore is hinting at. The Hamilton we see today in Ferrari red, battling understeer, losing 2/10 to Leclerc, calling himself useless, may look like the same Hamilton of 2013, wrestling with a car that does not fit. But history shows he is a driver who thrives when the rulebook rewrites the script. Numbers reinforce the comparison. In 2013, Hamilton's qualifying average was 0.18 seconds slower than Rosberg's across the season. By 2014, he was 0.23 seconds faster on average. The swing came not from sudden speed, but from adaptation to new systems. In 2025, his deficit to Leclerc is 0.22 seconds. The symmetry is almost eerie. And just as in 2013, the whispers about whether Hamilton fits his new team are growing louder. Briatore himself admitted only months ago that he didn't understand Ferrari's choice to split Leclerc and Sainz for Hamilton. Now his tone has shifted, not because Hamilton has improved, but because the regulations may soon reward him. But that raises a deeper, more political question. Why did Ferrari gamble on Hamilton at all? And what does it say about the team's internal vision for the future? Ferrari's decision to sign Lewis Hamilton was never just about lap times. On paper, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz formed one of the most balanced lineups in modern Ferrari history. Leclerc was the raw qualifier, delivering pole positions even against superior machinery. Sainz was the steady racer, extracting consistency and often outperforming expectations. Together, they anchored Ferrari through chaotic regulation swings and even managed to score Ferrari's last full Grand Prix victory before Hamilton arrived. Splitting that partnership was a statement and a risk. The numbers show why it was controversial. In 2023 and 2024 combined, Ferrari's average race score across both cars was 28.4 points per weekend. Not enough to challenge Red Bull or McLaren, but enough to keep them consistently in the mix. By replacing Sainz with Hamilton, Ferrari bet that star power and title-winning experience could elevate them beyond mixing into outright winning. But in 2025, their combined average has fallen to just 24.9 points per weekend. For all the talk of Hamilton's aura, the raw metrics suggest Ferrari have weakened their two-car strategy. Briatore himself once echoed this skepticism. Earlier this year, he admitted that while he respected Hamilton, he didn't understand why this great duo was torn apart. Coming from a man with his history of pairing drivers, he kept Alonso and Fisichella in harmony at Renault and once backed Webber alongside Coulthard. It was a stinging critique. And yet, Briatore's latest comments mark a dramatic pivot. Why? Because he, more than most, understands Ferrari's political DNA. The Scuderia has always been seduced by legends. They chased Schumacher in 1996 when critics said he was wasting his prime. They gambled on Alonso in 2010, despite doubts about harmony. Signing Hamilton fits the same pattern. Ferrari values not just the stopwatch, but the myth. That myth, however, comes at a cost. Leclerc has been quietly forced into the role of benchmark, Hamilton, the struggling outsider. The intra-team politics are tense, and Ferrari's gamble could backfire if the 2026 reset doesn't land. And yet, to understand why Hamilton might be the right risk at the wrong time, we need to leave politics behind and step into his mind, into the psychology of a champion who still believes in reinvention. When Lewis Hamilton described himself as useless in Australia, it wasn't just a moment of frustration. It was a glimpse into a champion's psychology under stress. For most drivers, such language signals resignation. For Hamilton, history shows it is often the precursor to reinvention. Hamilton has never been immune to doubt. In 2011 at McLaren, his radio messages were laced with despair after collisions and penalties. Critics said his focus had broken. 1 year later, he produced some of the sharpest drives of his career, often outperforming the machinery at his disposal. In 2016, after engine failures cost him a title, Hamilton admitted to sleepless nights and moments of anger. 1 season later, he dominated Vettel's Ferrari with unrelenting precision. What separates Hamilton is not immunity to pressure, but his response to it. He allows the frustration to surface, then channels it into adaptation. When he calls himself useless, it is not a verdict, but a diagnosis. It is the starting point of a process that has historically led to breakthroughs. Psychologically, Hamilton is driven by legacy. The pursuit of an 8th championship, to move beyond Schumacher, remains his ultimate motivation. At Ferrari, the challenge has sharpened. Not only must he fight McLaren's technical dominance and Verstappen's relentless speed, he must prove that his career choice was not a vanity project. The weight of expectation is heavier than ever. The body language in 2025 tells the story. In debriefs, Hamilton leans forward, hands animated, eyes fixed on engineers. On track, even in the flawed SF25, he pushes through traffic with aggression that belies his words of defeat. These contradictions, the despair in his voice, the defiance in his actions, reveal a competitor preparing for the next opening. For Flavio Briatore, this is why the 2026 reset is crucial. The regulations will hand Hamilton the chance to transform frustration into vindication. But the question is not only whether Hamilton can adapt again, it is whether Ferrari, politically fractured and strategically inconsistent, can deliver a car worthy of his psychology. Because if they do, the championship mathematics of 2026 could be rewritten overnight. If Flavio Briatore is right, and Ferrari deliver Hamilton a competitive car in 2026, the championship picture could change dramatically. Right now, the balance of power is clear. McLaren lead with ruthless efficiency, Verstappen remains the benchmark for consistency, and Ferrari are scrapping in the margins. But regulations do what no driver transfer can do. They wipe the slate clean. The numbers set the stage. At the midway point of 2025, McLaren's advantage over Ferrari in race trim. averages 0.32 seconds per lap. Across a 50-lap Grand Prix, that translates to 16 seconds of race time. The difference between fighting for victory and fighting for fourth. Ferrari cannot close that gap within the current rules. But in 2026, when power units shift to 50% electric deployment and drag reduction targets reset the aero field, those 16 seconds disappear. Suddenly, it's not about catch-up, it's about who adapts first. For Hamilton, this represents more than just opportunity. It represents his final realistic window to chase title number 8. He will be 41 years old when the 2026 season begins. Only Juan Manuel Fangio won a championship beyond that age. Yet Hamilton's fitness regime and mental sharpness suggest he is capable of defying that precedent, provided Ferrari give him the tools. The championship mathematics underline the stakes. If Hamilton can return to regular podiums, Ferrari could add 35 to 40 points per weekend instead of the 24 they currently average. Over 24 races, that swing represents more than 250 points, enough to close the gap to McLaren's current supremacy. In a compressed field, a driver with Hamilton's tactical awareness becomes a multiplier, turning marginal gains into decisive results. And beyond the numbers lies the symbolism. For Ferrari, returning to contention with Hamilton would echo Schumacher's revival of the Scuderia in 2000. For Hamilton, it would be vindication, proof that leaving Mercedes was not a mistake, but a gamble timed to perfection. Yet, championships are not won on numbers alone. They are shaped by perception, momentum, and the ability to rally a team under pressure. Which brings us to the final layer, how the paddock, rivals, insiders, even the FIA are already preparing for a Ferrari resurgence. Formula One does not exist in isolation. When Flavio Briatore made his prediction, the impact wasn't limited to Hamilton or Ferrari. The entire paddock felt the ripple. Rivals listen closely when a political operator of his stature speaks, because his words often reflect conversations already happening behind closed doors. Inside McLaren, the mood is one of cautious respect. Andrea Stella has privately admitted that 2026 is the great unknown, a reset that could undo their current dominance as quickly as it cemented it. Engineers in Woking are already modelling Ferrari's likely aero philosophy, anticipating that Hamilton's influence will push for a car balanced around braking stability and traction zones, rather than sheer straight-line speed. Red Bull, meanwhile, face their own internal turbulence. With Adrian Newey's departure looming large, and Verstappen's contract constantly in the headlines, the team knows 2026 could expose them in ways the 2014 reset once did. Privately, rivals believe Hamilton joining Ferrari was as much about destabilizing Red Bull as chasing Ferrari's glory. Even the FIA is watching closely. The 2026 regulations are designed to compress the field, but political maneuvering could determine who adapts first. Rumours suggest Ferrari have already lobbied for clarification on energy deployment rules, particularly around harvesting limits. If true, it shows Maranello are preparing the battlefield before the first car even turns a wheel. For Hamilton, these whispers matter. A driver's influence extends beyond telemetry. It extends into perception. The paddock already views him as the driver most capable of maximising a regulation reset. Every rival team principal knows that if Ferrari deliver him a car within 2/10 of the leaders, Hamilton's racecraft could swing the balance of a championship. And that perception creates its own pressure. McLaren must defend their supremacy, Red Bull must hold their driver, and Mercedes must watch the man they lost potentially rise again. In this way, Briatore's prediction is not simply commentary. It is a signal. A warning shot that the order of 2025 cannot be assumed in 2026. But the final question lingers. Is this optimism grounded in reality, or is it the last great gamble of Hamilton's career?